I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story. Most days I still wake up wondering if what happened to me was real. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw. And I know the message I was given. Before I get into all that, let me introduce myself. My name is Michael Kearney. I served as a staff sergeant with the 10th Mountain Division, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry Regiment. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2013. The incident I'm about to describe happened during my second deployment in Wardak Province in 2011. I was 32 years old at the time. I'd been in the Army for nearly 12 years, having enlisted right after September 11th. Like a lot of guys, I joined up because of what happened that day. I was working construction back in Minnesota when the towers fell. I remember standing in this half-finished office building. Everyone gathered around this small TV somebody had brought to the site. We just watched in silence. By the end of the week, I was at a recruiting office. I'd always been the kind of guy who believed in something greater than myself. Not particularly religious, mind you. My mom dragged us to church on Easter and Christmas, but that was about it. I believed in God, I guess, in that vague way many Americans do. But I wasn't what you'd call devout. I believed more in country, in duty, in the guys to my left and right. That was my religion, if you want to call it that. My first tour in Afghanistan was relatively quiet. I mean, there were incidents, firefights, IEDs, the usual, but nothing that shook me to my core. I came back home feeling like I'd done my job. I spent time with my girlfriend, Jennifer. We'd been together since high school, on and off. She stuck with me through that first deployment, writing letters, sending care packages. When I got back, I proposed. We planned to get married after my second tour. The night before I left for that second deployment, we were lying in bed, and she put her hand on my chest. "You come back to me, Mike. You hear me? You come back whole." I promised her I would, and I meant it. Afghanistan looked different the second time around. Maybe I was different. You know how it is. The first time you're in combat, there's this weird mix of terror and excitement. The second time, you know exactly what you're walking into. The fear is colder, more calculated. You've seen what happens to guys who get complacent. You've zipped up enough body bags to know it's all too real. Our mission was pretty standard for that time. Counterinsurgency operations, training Afghan forces, securing areas so reconstruction teams could do their work. We were based at Forward Operating Base Shank, or Rocket City as we called it, because of how frequently the Taliban would lob rockets at us. Most days involved patrols, meetings with local leaders, training exercises with the ANA, the Afghan National Army. My squad was solid. I had 11 guys under me, most of them on their first or second tour. There was Rodriguez, my team leader, a Puerto Rican guy from the Bronx who could make anyone laugh even after 36 hours without sleep. Walsh was my radio man, the skinny Irish kid from Boston who carried that radio like it was his firstborn child. Nguyen was our medic, second-generation Vietnamese American, who knew more about battlefield trauma than most ER doctors. The others were good men too. Miller, Jackson, Thompson, Davis, Martinez, Wilson, Cooper, and Lewis. We'd been in country about 4 months when things started heating up in our area. Intelligence indicated increased Taliban activity, weapons smuggling, the usual chatter that precedes something big. Our command decided to increase patrols in several villages where we suspected Taliban fighters were hiding or being supported. The day it happened was May 17th, 2011. I remember because it was exactly 1 month before Jennifer and I were supposed to get married. I'd been counting down the days. 124 to go, I thought that morning as I geared up. The mission was to patrol through Syedabad, a small village about 15 clicks from our fob. We'd been there dozens of times before. The locals were generally friendly, or at least not openly hostile. The kids would run alongside our vehicles, begging for candy or pens. We'd built a well there the year before and helped repair their school. As far as relationships went in that war, it was about as good as it got. We left the fob at 0600. The early morning air still had that chill to it that Afghanistan gets in the spring, especially in the highlands. The sun was just coming up over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. It was beautiful in that harsh way that country can be beautiful. All browns and tans with splashes of green where water touched the earth. Our convoy consisted of 3 MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. Big, ugly beasts, but they'd save plenty of lives from IEDs. I was in the lead vehicle with Rodriguez driving, Walsh on the radio, and Miller manning the 50 cal up top. We rolled through the gates of the fob and onto the main road, such as it was, mostly packed dirt with occasional patches of ancient asphalt. Hey, Sarge, Rodriguez said as we bounced along. You think the Cubs are going to make the playoffs this year? It was a running joke between us. I was a diehard Cubs fan, had been since I was a kid watching games with my grandpa on his old TV. Rodriguez was a Yankees man naturally, and never missed a chance to give me grief about my perpetually disappointing team. This is the year, Rod, I said. The same thing I said every time he asked. This is finally the year. Yeah, he laughed. You said that last year. And the year before that. Hope springs eternal, I replied, checking my weapon for the 100th time that morning, a nervous habit I developed over the years. The drive to Syedabad took about 45 minutes. Nothing unusual happened along the way. We passed farmers working their fields, women hanging laundry, kids heading to school. Normal life going on in the shadow of war, the way it always does. We parked our vehicles at the edge of the village and continued on foot. Standard protocol, less intimidating to the locals, better awareness of our surroundings. The downside, of course, was that we were more exposed, but that was the job. Spread out, I told my squad as we moved into the village. Eyes open. Rodriguez, take point. Davis and Wilson, I want you watching our six. The village was already awake and bustling. The smell of bread baking mixed with the less pleasant odors of livestock and open sewage. A group of men sat outside what passed for the local tea house, watching us with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. I nodded at them as we passed. Some nodded back. Others just stared. We made our way to the center of the village where the well stood. Our first objective was to meet with the village elder, a man named Fahim, who had always been cooperative. His compound was just past the well, a mud brick structure with wooden gates. Something felt off, though. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The village was quieter than usual. Fewer kids running around. Some of the shops that would normally be open were closed. Walsh, I said, radio back to base. Tell them we're in position, but the village seems unusual. Possible suspicious activity. Walsh nodded and began speaking quietly into his radio. That's when I noticed it, the absence of young men. In a typical Afghan village, you'd see men of all ages. But looking around, I realized most of the men visible were either very old or very young. The fighting-age men were nowhere to be seen. Rodriguez, I called quietly. You notice anything strange? He paused, scanning the area. Where is everybody? The young guys? Exactly what I was thinking. I motioned for the squad to tighten up. Stay alert, I said. Something's not right. We approached the elder's compound. The gate was closed, which was unusual. Typically, Fahim would be expecting us and have the gate open. Nguyen, I said, you speak the best Pashto. Tell them we're here to see Fahim. Nguyen stepped forward and called out in Pashto. No response. He tried again, louder this time. After a moment, the gate creaked open slightly. A boy, maybe 12 years old, peered out. He looked terrified. Nguyen spoke to him gently. The boy responded in rapid Pashto, his eyes darting back and forth between us and something behind him. What's he saying? I asked. He says his grandfather is sick and cannot meet with us today, Nguyen translated. He asked us to come back tomorrow. That wasn't right. If Fahim was sick, protocol would be for his eldest son to meet with us instead. Ask him where the men of the village are, I said. Nguyen spoke to the boy again. The kid's face went pale. He shook his head and began to close the gate. Sarge, Miller's voice came from behind me, urgent. Movement on the rooftops, east side. I spun around, bringing my rifle up. Take cover, I shouted. The first shot cracked through the air before I'd even finished speaking. The distinctive sound of a high-powered rifle, not the usual AK-47 we typically encountered. This was something with range and precision, a sniper. The round hit the wall behind me, sending chips of mud brick flying. My squad scattered, diving for whatever cover they could find. I pressed myself against the wall of Fahim's compound, trying to spot the shooter. Walsh, call it in! We're taking fire, I yelled. The village had emptied in seconds. Doors slammed shut. Shutters closed. The only people visible now were my squad, pinned down and exposed. I can't see him, Rodriguez shouted from his position behind a wooden cart. Another shot rang out. This one found its mark. Davis cried out, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. Man down, Nguyen called, already moving toward Davis in a crouch run. Cover him, I ordered. Miller and Thompson opened fire toward the eastern rooftops, providing suppressing fire as Nguyen reached Davis and dragged him behind a low stone wall. How bad? I called to Nguyen. Through and through, he shouted back. He'll live, but he needs evac. Walsh was on the radio, calling for support. Eagle 6, this is Bravo 2. We are taking sniper fire in the village. One man wounded. Request immediate support and medevac. The radio crackled. Bravo 2, this is Eagle 6. Support is on the way. ETA 15 minutes. Can you get to your vehicles? I looked at the distance to where we'd parked the MRAPS. It was about 200 meters of mostly open ground. With a sniper watching, it might as well have been 2,000. Negative Eagle 6, Walsh replied. We're pinned down in the center of the village. Another shot, another miss, but closer this time. The sniper was getting our range. Rodriguez, I called out. Can you see where those shots are coming from? Rodriguez was the best spotter in our squad. He had eyes like a hawk. I think... He paused, squinting toward the eastern edge of the village. There, second house from the end. Red door, upper window. I followed his gaze. There was indeed a house with a red door, about 300 meters away. The window was small, partially covered by a faded curtain. Miller, Thompson. Suppressing fire on that window, I ordered. The rest of you were going to leapfrog back to the vehicles. Nguyen, you and Lewis get Davis moving first. Wilson and Cooper, you cover them. My mind was racing through scenarios, trying to figure out the best way to get my men out alive. Was this a lone sniper, or was there a larger ambush waiting? Were there fighters on the ground too, waiting for us to break cover? On my mark, I said. 3, 2, 1, mark. Miller and Thompson opened up on the window, while Nguyen and Lewis hoisted Davis between them and began moving toward the edge of the village. Wilson and Cooper moved alongside them, weapons ready. That's when all hell broke loose. RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, came screaming in from multiple directions. One hit just behind our position, the explosion throwing me forward onto my face. My ears rang, and for a few seconds the world went silent, except for a high-pitched whine. I pushed myself up, disoriented. Dust and smoke filled the air. Through the haze, I could see that one of our MREPs was on fire. The RPG must have hit it directly. Fall back, I shouted, though I could barely hear my own voice. Back to the compounds. This wasn't just a sniper. This was an ambush, and we'd walked right into it. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions now. Not just the sniper, but AK-47s and machine guns. The Taliban fighters who had been hiding in the village were now revealing themselves, firing from windows, doorways, and rooftops. My squad was scattered but responding, returning fire where they could. I saw Rodriguez drag an injured Thompson behind a wall. Walsh was still on the radio, calling desperately for air support. I fired a burst toward a window where I'd seen muzzle flash, then moved to where Walsh was taking cover. What's the word? I shouted over the gunfire. Apache helicopters en route, he yelled back. 10 minutes out. 10 minutes might as well have been 10 hours. We needed to hold our position until then. Pass the word, I told him. Conserve ammo, accurate fire only. We need to hold for 10. Walsh nodded and began relaying the message to the others. I did a quick assessment. Davis was wounded but stable. Now Thompson was hit too, but still able to fire his weapon. Everyone else seemed okay for the moment. We were pinned down, but we had good cover. If we could just hold out until the air support arrived, that's when I saw the boy again, the one from Fahim's compound. He was running across the open area, directly into the line of fire. Hold fire in the center, I shouted. Civilian! The boy was running toward us, his face a mask of terror. What the hell was he doing? As he got closer, I could see his mouth moving. He was trying to tell us something. That's when the shot came. I never heard it. That's what they say about a sniper's bullet that hits you. You never hear the one with your name on it. One moment I was watching the boy running toward us. The next I felt, not pain exactly, but impact. Like being hit with a sledgehammer directly in the chest. I looked down and saw the blood blossoming across my body armor. The round had found a gap, or maybe it had been powerful enough to penetrate. Either way, I knew immediately it was bad. I didn't fall right away. That's something they don't tell you in the movies. Sometimes when you get hit, your body doesn't get the message right away. I stood there for what felt like forever, watching my own blood pumping out of me. Sarge! I heard Rodriguez's voice, distant, like he was calling from the bottom of a well. Man down, Sarge is hit. The world tilted sideways. I felt the ground come up to meet me, but I didn't feel the impact. Everything was going quiet, the sounds of battle fading. Nguyen's face appeared above me, his features tight with concentration. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. He was pressing something against my chest. His hands were red. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I wasn't afraid. Because strangely, I wasn't. There was pain, yes, but it was distant, like it belonged to someone else. Mostly I felt cold and tired. So very tired. More faces appeared above me. Rodriguez. Walsh. They looked scared. I wanted to reassure them, to tell them to focus on the mission, not on me. But I couldn't seem to make my mouth work. I thought of Jennifer then, of the promise I'd made to her. You come back to me, Mike. You come back whole. I was breaking that promise. That bothered me more than dying. The sky above my squad's heads was so blue, impossibly blue. Had it always been that blue? How had I never noticed? The edges of my vision began to darken. Tunnel vision, they call it. The circle of light grew smaller and smaller, until all I could see was that patch of Afghan sky. And then nothing. Darkness. Complete and absolute. That's when the strange part began. The part I've struggled to describe ever since. The part that changed everything I thought I knew about life and death. The darkness didn't last. I don't know how long I was in it. Time didn't seem to exist there. But gradually I became aware again. Not in the way you wake up from sleep. It wasn't like opening my eyes. It was more like expanding. Like my consciousness was suddenly freed from the confines of my body. The first thing I noticed was that I could see, but not from my eyes. I was seeing everything, all at once, 360 degrees, above, below, all around. And I was moving, rising upward, away from something on the ground. With a shock of recognition, I realized what I was looking at. It was me, my body lying there in the dirt of that Afghan village. Nguyen was hunched over me, performing CPR, his arms pumping rhythmically on my chest. Rodriguez was firing his weapon with one hand, the other on my shoulder, shaking me, his mouth open in what I assumed was a shout. Walsh had my wrist, feeling for a pulse he wouldn't find. I wasn't in pain anymore. I wasn't afraid. I felt peaceful, completely at peace for the first time since I'd arrived in that country. Maybe for the first time in my adult life. I continued to rise, moving higher above the scene. I could see the entire village now, laid out like a map below me. I could see Taliban fighters moving between buildings. I could see my squad holding their position, fighting back. I could see the boy, the one who had been running toward us, now huddled behind a wall crying. I kept rising until the village was just a small collection of structures in a vast landscape. I could see for miles in every direction. The mountains, the valleys, the roads snaking between them. In the distance, I could see what looked like 2 Apache helicopters approaching. Help was coming, but it would be too late for me. The strange thing was, this didn't upset me. I felt completely detached from that body below, from that life. Like I was watching a movie about someone else. Then something changed. The quality of the light around me shifted. It's hard to describe. It wasn't like sunlight or artificial light. It was more like luminescence. Like everything was glowing from within. I became aware that I wasn't alone. There was a presence with me. Not a person exactly. Not a figure I could see, but a consciousness. No, that's not right either. It was more than that. It was as if I was suddenly immersed in a field of awareness, of knowing, of love. That's the word that comes closest, love. But not the kind of love we experience in life. This was overwhelming, unconditional, absolute. It surrounded me, filled me, accepted me completely. Every flaw, every mistake, every regret, all known, all embraced, all forgiven. And there was more. As this presence enveloped me, I began to sense others, other consciousnesses, other beings. Some felt familiar, though I couldn't have named them. Others were strange yet not frightening. All were part of this field of awareness, this ocean of knowing. I don't know how else to explain it, but I felt like I was home. Like I'd been away on a long, long journey and had finally returned to where I truly belonged. The relief was immense. The peace was absolute. Then communication began. Not with words, there were no words. It was direct understanding. Concepts, emotions, knowledge transferred instantly, completely. I asked questions without speaking and received answers without hearing. I understood things that had mystified me my entire life. The purpose of existence, the nature of reality, the connectedness of all things. I learned that what we call life is just a tiny fragment of our true existence. That the world we know is like a shadow of the fuller reality. That death is not an ending, but a transition, a shedding of limitations, a return to our larger self. I saw my life laid out before me, not linearly, not as a timeline, but all at once, every moment existing simultaneously. I saw how each choice I'd made had affected others, rippling outward in ways I'd never imagined. I saw the people I'd helped and those I'd hurt. I experienced their joy and their pain as if it were my own. And yet there was no judgment, no condemnation. Only understanding and that all-encompassing love. I don't know how long I existed in this state. Time had no meaning there. It could have been seconds or centuries. But at some point, I became aware of a decision that needed to be made. I could continue on, further into this realm of light and understanding, or I could return. Return? Return where? To that broken body on the ground? Why would I want to do that? This place, this state of being, was perfection. Why would anyone leave it? The answer came not in words but in images. I saw Jennifer waiting for me. I saw my mother, who had already lost my father and couldn't bear to lose a son. I saw my squad, fighting not just the enemy but to save my life. I saw a future that could be, if I chose to return. And there was something else. A message. A purpose. Something I needed to understand, to remember, to share. What happened next is hard to describe. It was like being shown a truth so profound, so fundamental, that it changed everything. I saw how all of existence, every atom, every star, every living being, was connected in a vast, intricate web of consciousness. I saw that what we call God, or the divine, wasn't separate from us, but was the very fabric of our being, the medium in which we exist. I saw that love, real, unconditional love, was the basic force of reality, the gravity that holds the spiritual universe together. And I understood my task. If I returned, I was to carry this understanding back with me. Not to preach or convert, but to live it. To be a witness to this deeper reality. To help others see past the illusions of separation and fear that dominate our world. It wasn't a command. There was no coercion. It was an invitation freely given, with the understanding that I could freely decline. I hesitated. The pain and limitation of physical existence seemed so unnecessary now, so primitive compared to this state of being. And yet, there was something beautiful about that limited existence too. Something precious in its very fragility. Something sacred in the struggle to remember, to connect, to love despite the veil of separation. I made my choice. The transition back was nothing like the transition out. There was no gentle rising, no expanding awareness. It was violent, jarring, like being slammed back into a too small container. There was pain, intense, overwhelming pain. There was noise and chaos and bright, harsh light. "We've got a rhythm," someone was shouting. He's back! He's back!" Hands were on me, moving me. The vibration of a helicopter. The smell of blood and antiseptic. The taste of metal in my mouth. I tried to speak, to tell them about what I'd seen, what I'd learned. But there was something in my throat. A tube. I couldn't talk. I couldn't move. I could only lie there as the helicopter raced through the Afghan sky, carrying me back to a life I no longer fully belonged to. The next few days, or was it weeks, passed in a blur of surgeries, medications, and pain. I drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes when I was under, I would catch glimpses of that other realm, that state of perfect peace. Each time I returned to my body, the contrast was more jarring, more painful. I learned later that the bullet had missed my heart by less than an inch. It had torn through my right lung, shattered 2 ribs, and exited through my back. I had died, actually, clinically died, for approximately 3 minutes and 42 seconds before Nguyen managed to resuscitate me. The medevac had arrived moments later, and they'd kept me alive somehow during the flight to the field hospital at Bagram. From there, I'd been stabilized and transported to Landstuhl in Germany, then eventually back to Walter Reed in the States. I'd undergone 4 surgeries. I'd received 14 units of blood. By all medical standards, my survival was considered remarkable. But I knew it wasn't just good medical care or luck that had brought me back. I had chosen to return. I had a purpose, a message. The problem was, as my body healed, the memory of that experience began to fade. Not completely. I still remembered the broad strokes, the overwhelming feelings, the general message. But the specifics, the profound understanding that had seemed so clear and obvious there, began to slip away, like a dream upon waking. I struggled to find words for what I'd experienced. Every attempt seemed inadequate, reductive. How do you describe colors to someone who's been blind from birth? How do you explain music to someone who's never heard a sound? The concepts, the knowing, the reality I'd experienced existed beyond language. The doctors and psychiatrists had their explanations, of course. Oxygen deprivation to the brain, hallucinations caused by trauma and medication, the mind's attempt to create meaning in the face of death. I listened to their theories but didn't argue. How could I expect them to understand something that defied their entire framework of reality? Jennifer came to see me as soon as I was stable enough for visitors. She flew to Germany, then followed me back to Walter Reed. She never left my side. When I was finally able to speak after they removed the ventilator, she was the first person I tried to tell about my experience. She listened without interrupting, holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she didn't question or analyze or try to explain it away. She simply said, "I believe you, Mike. I don't understand it all, but I believe you." That meant more to me than she could know. My squad visited too, those who could. Rodriguez and Walsh came together. They told me what had happened after I'd been hit, how they'd held off the Taliban until the Apaches arrived, how Nguyen had refused to give up on me, even when everyone else thought I was gone. They'd lost Thompson. The second RPG had caught him in the open. Lewis had lost his leg. The others had made it out with various injuries, none life-threatening. The boy, they told me, had been trying to warn us. He'd known about the ambush, had tried to prevent it despite the danger to himself. His grandfather, Fahim, had been killed the night before when he'd refused to help the Taliban fighters who'd entered the village. The boy had survived by hiding. When I was strong enough, I asked about him, what had happened to him after the battle. Rodriguez shook his head. They didn't know. In the chaos of the medevac and the ongoing fight, they lost track of him. He might have escaped to another village. He might not have survived at all. That haunted me, the not knowing. In my mind, he became a symbol of all the things left unresolved, all the loose ends of war. Months passed. I healed, physically at least. The nightmares were the worst part, not of the ambush or the shooting, but of trying to get back to that place of peace and not being able to, of having glimpsed perfection and then being locked out of it. I received a Purple Heart and a medical discharge. Jennifer and I got married in a small ceremony at Walter Reed, with my right arm still in a sling and pain medication dulling my senses. It wasn't the wedding we'd planned, but somehow it felt right. A new beginning, born from an ending. We moved back to Minnesota, to a small house outside Minneapolis. I started physical therapy, learning to accommodate the permanent damage to my right lung and shoulder. The VA provided treatment for what they called PTSD, which seemed like an inadequate term for what I was experiencing. It wasn't just trauma from the ambush. It was existential displacement, the feeling of being a visitor in my own life. Jennifer urged me to talk about my experience, to write it down, to share it with others who might understand. At first I resisted. The memory was sacred to me, and I feared that putting it into words would diminish it somehow. Plus, I was afraid of the skepticism, the disbelief, the analysis that would attempt to explain away what I knew to be real. But the message I'd been given, the purpose I'd accepted, it nagged at me. I hadn't returned just to live a quiet life in Minnesota. I'd returned to bear witness, to share what I'd learned, to help others see past the illusions that keep us separated and afraid. So I started small. I joined a support group for veterans, and when I felt safe enough, I shared my story. The response surprised me. Instead of skepticism, I found recognition. Many of them hadn't had near-death experiences, but they understood the sense of displacement, of seeing the world differently after combat. Some had had their own brushes with death, their own glimpses beyond the veil, though few as extensive as mine. One night, after a particularly powerful group session, a man approached me. He was older, a Vietnam vet with sad eyes and steady hands. "I had an experience like yours," he told me quietly. "In '68, during Tet. Took a mortar round. Was dead for 4 minutes." He described an experience remarkably similar to mine. The rising above his body, the overwhelming peace, the communication without words, the choice to return. He'd never told anyone except his wife, he said. "People look at you different when you talk about this stuff," he explained. "Like you're crazy or trying to sell them something." I asked him if the memory had faded for him too, if the profound understanding he'd gained there had slipped away over time. "Some of it," he admitted. "The details get fuzzy. But the important part stays with you. The knowing. You don't remember it all, but you don't forget it either." He was right. While I couldn't recall every aspect of what I'd experienced, the core of it remained. The absolute certainty that we are more than our bodies, that death is not the end, that love is the fundamental reality behind everything we see and touch and know. That conversation was a turning point for me. I began to seek out others who'd had similar experiences. I read books and articles about near-death experiences across cultures and throughout history. I discovered that what had happened to me wasn't unique or even rare. Thousands, perhaps millions of people had glimpsed what I had glimpsed, had returned with the same message. We are all connected. Love is the basis of reality. Fear and separation are illusions. The more I learned, the more I felt compelled to speak out. not to convert anyone to a specific belief system. What I'd experienced went beyond any religion, though it didn't contradict the core of most spiritual traditions. I simply wanted to share an alternative to the materialist worldview that dominates our culture, that tells us we are nothing but complex biological machines, that death is final, that consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity. I knew differently. I had experienced differently. Jennifer supported me completely. "This is why you came back," she would say. "This is your mission now." My message wasn't always welcome. Some people, especially those most invested in a materialist worldview, reacted with dismissal or hostility. Some religious folks were uncomfortable with an experience of the divine that didn't fit neatly into their theological frameworks. Some fellow veterans felt I was somehow diminishing the reality of combat, of death, by suggesting there was something beyond it. But others, many others, responded with relief, with recognition, with gratitude. People who'd had their own experiences but had never felt safe sharing them. People who were grieving and found comfort in the idea that their loved ones continued to exist. People who sensed deep down that there must be more to existence than what we can touch and measure and prove. I didn't have all the answers. The experience hadn't made me omniscient. There were still mysteries, still questions, still struggles. I still had nightmares. I still felt pain, physical and emotional. I was still human, limited by a human perspective most of the time. But I had seen beyond those limitations, if only briefly. I had touched something greater than myself. I had died in Afghanistan and come back with a message. A message not just for my family or my country, but for anyone willing to listen. A message about who we really are, about what reality really is, about the love that connects all things. It's been 10 years now since that day in Sayyidabad. 10 years of healing, of questioning, of gradual acceptance. 10 years of trying to live up to the task I accepted when I chose to return. Jennifer and I have 2 children now, a girl and a boy. We named our son Thompson after the squad member who didn't make it back. Our daughter's middle name is Faith, which seemed appropriate given everything that happened. I still think about that Afghan boy sometimes, the one who tried to warn us. I wonder what happened to him, where he is now, if he survived the war. In my mind, he's become a kind of symbol of courage, of connection across boundaries, of the possibility of compassion even in the darkest circumstances. I think about my squad, too. Rodriguez got out of the Army a year after I did. He's in Chicago now, working with at-risk youth. Walsh stayed in, made it to first sergeant before retiring last year. Nguyen became a physician's assistant, using the skills he'd learned in combat to heal rather than just patch up. The others scattered across the country, carrying their own wounds, visible and invisible. We stay in touch. Not as often as we should, maybe, but the bond remains. They don't all understand what happened to me, what I experienced. Some are skeptical, some are open, some prefer not to talk about it at all. But they respect it, respect that it changed me. And they know better than most that war changes you regardless, that no one comes back the same person who left. As for me, I found a kind of peace. Not the perfect peace I experienced on the other side. Nothing in this life compares to that. But a quieter peace, a deeper acceptance of both the beauty and the suffering of human existence. I still have questions. I still have doubts sometimes. Was what I experienced real, or was it just my dying brain creating comforting hallucinations? Why was I allowed to come back when others weren't? What am I supposed to do with what I've learned? Am I doing enough? Am I getting the message right? But beneath these questions, there's a bedrock certainty, an unshakable knowing. I died. I experienced something beyond death. I returned with a truth that nothing in this world has been able to erase or explain away. I'm not special. I'm not a guru or a prophet. I'm just a former staff sergeant who saw beyond the veil for a brief moment and came back changed. My experience doesn't make me better than anyone else. If anything, it humbled me, showed me how little I truly understood before. But it did give me a perspective that few have, a glimpse of what awaits all of us, a reminder of what matters most in this life. Not success or possessions or power, but connection, compassion, love. That's the message I brought back from the other side. That's why I chose to return. That's what I'm here to share in whatever way I can for however long I have left in this world. Because one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe 50 years from now, I'll cross that threshold again. And next time, I won't be coming back. But I'm not afraid of that day. How could I be? I've already died once. I've already seen what's waiting for us. And it's more beautiful than anything I could possibly describe. So that's my story. That's what happened to me in Afghanistan on May 17th, 2011. That's the message I died to bring back. What you do with it, whether you believe it, dismiss it, or hold it as a possibility, is up to you. But I had to share it. I had to try, because that's why I came back. That's why I'm still here. In the years after my near-death experience, I found myself living in two worlds. There was the physical world, the one with mortgage payments and diaper changes and the constant, dull ache in my right shoulder that never quite went away. Then there was the other world, the memory of that vast consciousness I'd touched, the understanding that had come to me so clearly on the other side, the mission I'd accepted when I chose to return. Balancing these worlds wasn't easy. Some days the physical world demanded all my attention. The kids would be sick, or Jennifer would need help with the house, or the nightmares would be so bad I couldn't think about anything except surviving until morning. Other days, the memory of what I'd experienced would be so vivid, so compelling, that the physical world seemed like the dream, insubstantial, temporary, almost illusory. I started having these moments. I don't know what else to call them. Moments when the veil between worlds would thin, and I'd catch a glimpse of that greater reality again. It would happen unexpectedly, while watching my daughter sleep, or driving alone at sunset, or sometimes in the middle of a conversation. Everything would suddenly shift, and for a few seconds I'd see with different eyes. I'd see the light in people, the connections between all things, the underlying perfection of existence that our everyday consciousness misses. These moments never lasted long, but they reminded me of what I'd experienced, refreshed my understanding when it started to fade under the weight of daily life. Jennifer noticed these episodes. "You go somewhere else sometimes," she told me one night as we sat on the porch watching the stars. "Your eyes change. Like you're seeing something the rest of us can't." I tried to explain it to her, though I knew words were inadequate. "It's like remembering, not with my mind, but with my whole being. Like something in me recognizes the truth again, just for a moment." She nodded, though I knew she couldn't fully understand. How could she? Even I couldn't understand it completely, and I'd experienced it firsthand. "Does it scare you?" she asked. "These moments?" I thought about it. "No," I said finally. "They remind me why I'm here. They help me stay on course." Jennifer squeezed my hand. She'd been my anchor through all of this. Never doubting, never judging, simply accepting that something profound had happened to me and that I was still figuring out how to integrate it into my life. As time passed, I felt increasingly drawn to share my experience with others. Not just in the veterans support group, but more widely. I started a blog, anonymously at first, describing what had happened to me and what I'd learned from it. I was careful not to make claims I couldn't support, to acknowledge the subjective nature of my experience while asserting the life-changing impact it had on me. To my surprise, the blog gained a following. People from all walks of life, not just veterans, found resonance in what I was sharing. They'd email me their own stories, brushes with death, profound spiritual experiences, moments of inexplicable connection or knowing. Many had kept these experiences secret for years, afraid of ridicule or dismissal. My openness gave them permission to acknowledge their own truth. About 2 years after my return from Afghanistan, I received an email that would change the direction of my life again. It was from a researcher at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, a department that scientifically investigates phenomena that challenge mainstream scientific paradigms, things like near-death experiences, memories of past lives, and other anomalous experiences. The researcher, Dr. Elena Kaplan, had come across my blog and was interested in interviewing me for a study they were conducting on NDEs in combat veterans. "Your account is one of the most detailed and articulate we've encountered," she wrote. "We believe your experience could contribute significantly to our understanding of this phenomenon." I was hesitant at first. I'd grown protective of my experience, wary of having it reduced to brain chemistry or explained away as a hallucination. But after exchanging several emails with Dr. Kaplan, I was reassured by her approach. She wasn't looking to debunk or pathologize. She was genuinely interested in understanding these experiences on their own terms. I agreed to participate in the study. Jennifer and I flew to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I underwent a series of interviews and assessments. Dr. Kaplan and her colleagues were respectful, curious, and open-minded. They didn't try to tell me what I'd experienced. They wanted to learn from me. During one of our sessions, Dr. Kaplan shared something that resonated deeply with me. "We've interviewed hundreds of people who've had NDEs," she said. from all different backgrounds, cultures, belief systems. The details vary, but there are consistent core elements that appear across the board. The sense of peace, the life review, the encounter with light or a presence of unconditional love. And most significantly, the conviction that consciousness continues beyond physical death. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. These experiences change people, Mr. Kearney, consistently, profoundly, and in measurable ways. The people we study are less materialistic afterward, more compassionate, less afraid of death, more environmentally conscious, more spiritually attuned, regardless of their religious background or lack thereof. Whatever is happening in these experiences, the effects are real and transformative. I nodded, feeling a wave of validation. It wasn't just me. I wasn't alone in this. The question, she continued, isn't whether these experiences happen, clearly they do, or whether they change people, clearly they do. The question is what they tell us about the nature of consciousness, about what we are as human beings. That question became central to my own exploration in the years that followed. What does my experience tell me, tell all of us, about who and what we really are? The traditional scientific view that consciousness is produced by the brain and ends when the brain dies couldn't account for what I'd experienced. I'd been clinically dead. My brain had shut down. And yet my consciousness hadn't just continued. It had expanded, become more clear, more aware, more alive than ever. This suggested something radical, that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but is somehow received or channeled by it. That what we call mind isn't confined to the brain, but is part of something much larger, much more fundamental to reality. That when the body dies, consciousness continues, freed from the limitations of physical existence. These weren't just abstract philosophical questions for me. They were deeply personal. They spoke to the core of my identity, to the meaning of my life, both the one I'd nearly lost and the one I was now living. My participation in Dr. Kaplan's study led to other opportunities. I was invited to speak at conferences on consciousness research, spirituality, and veterans healing. I connected with other researchers in the field, physicians, neuroscientists, psychologists, quantum physicists, all exploring the frontiers where science and spirituality meet. I found that there was a growing body of scientific evidence suggesting that consciousness might not be what mainstream science had assumed. Quantum physics had shown that consciousness affects physical reality at the subatomic level. Research into psychic phenomena had produced results that couldn't be explained by chance. Studies of NDEs had documented verified perceptions by patients who were clinically dead, their brains showing no activity. None of this proved what I'd experienced in any definitive way. But it opened doors, created space for possibilities beyond the materialist paradigm that dominates our culture. It suggested that my experience, far from being a hallucination or a product of a dying brain, might have revealed something fundamental about the nature of reality. Not everyone in my life understood or supported this new direction. Some old friends drifted away, uncomfortable with what they saw as my preoccupation with death or spirituality. Some family members worried I was going down a rabbit hole of pseudoscience or delusion. Even some fellow veterans felt I was somehow betraying the hard reality of war by suggesting there was something beyond the physical world. My father-in-law, a retired engineer with a firmly materialist worldview, was particularly skeptical. "Mike," he said during one family dinner, after I'd tried to explain my understanding of consciousness, "you had a traumatic experience. Your brain was oxygen deprived. Of course you saw things. That doesn't mean they were real." I'd heard this argument many times before, but coming from family, it stung. "Jim," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, "I understand your perspective. I really do. Before this happened to me, I might have thought the same thing. But there are aspects of what I experienced that can't be explained by brain chemistry." "Like what?" he challenged. I took a deep breath. "Like the verifiable details I perceived while I was clinically dead. Things happening outside the room where my body was. Conversations between medical staff that I later confirmed. Like the consistent core elements that appear in NDEs across cultures and throughout history, regardless of the person's beliefs or expectations. Like the profound and lasting transformation these experiences cause." He shook his head unmoved. "The mind is powerful. It can create very convincing illusions." "Yes, it can," I agreed. "But it can also perceive truth that our ordinary senses miss. Jim, I'm not asking you to believe what I believe. I'm just asking you to consider that there might be more to reality than what our current scientific paradigms can explain. He changed the subject then, but the tension remained. It was a pattern I'd become familiar with. The resistance, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, to any suggestion that consciousness might transcend the physical brain or continue after death. I understood this resistance. It threatened a worldview that many people are deeply invested in, a worldview that provides certainty, control, clear boundaries. To suggest that consciousness might be primary, that it might exist independent of the brain, that it might continue after death, this opens up questions that can be profoundly unsettling for those who built their understanding of reality on materialist foundations. But for others, many others, what I was sharing offered hope, comfort, a sense of meaning and purpose that the materialist worldview often fails to provide. People would come up to me after talks, tears in their eyes, to tell me how my story had helped them process their own grief, their own questions about life and death, their own spiritual experiences that they'd never felt safe sharing. One woman in her 70s waited until everyone else had left after a presentation I gave at a consciousness conference. She approached me slowly, her eyes both hesitant and determined. "My husband died last year," she said without preamble. "We'd been married 52 years. The night he passed, I was sitting with him in hospice. He'd been unconscious for days, but right before he died, he suddenly opened his eyes, looked at a point above the bed, and smiled the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. Then he looked at me and said, 'They're here, Margaret. It's beautiful. Don't be afraid.'" Her voice broke a little. He'd never been a religious man, never talked about an afterlife. But in that moment, he saw something, someone waiting for him. And he wasn't afraid at all. She reached out and touched my arm lightly. "After you've seen that, seen someone you love cross over with such peace, such joy, how can you doubt?" I knew in that moment that death isn't the end, that we'll be together again. What you shared today, it helps me hold on to that knowing when doubt creeps in. These encounters happen frequently. People sharing their own brushes with the boundary between life and death, their own glimpses beyond the veil. I came to see that my role wasn't to convince the skeptics, but to support those who already knew, on some level, that consciousness is more than brain activity, that love continues beyond death, that we are part of something greater than our physical existence. About 5 years after my NDE, an unexpected opportunity arose. A documentary filmmaker who had attended one of my talks approached me about participating in a film about near-death experiences. He wanted to focus specifically on combat veterans, exploring how NDEs affected their processing of trauma and their reintegration into civilian life. The project resonated with me. My own NDE had profoundly altered how I viewed my combat experiences, how I processed the trauma of war. While I still carried the psychological and physical scars of my time in Afghanistan, the perspective I'd gained on the other side had changed my relationship to that pain. I'd glimpsed a larger context, a deeper purpose to our human struggles. This didn't erase the trauma, but it transformed it, gave it meaning beyond suffering. I agreed to participate in the documentary. The filmmaker, David, wanted to interview me on camera, but he also wanted to film me reconnecting with some of my squad members, exploring how our shared combat experience and my subsequent NDE had affected our relationships and our individual healing journeys. Rodriguez was the first to agree. He flew up to Minnesota from Chicago, and David filmed our reunion at a quiet park near my home. It had been almost 2 years since we'd seen each other in person, though we talked regularly by phone. The moment I saw him walking toward me, that familiar grin on his face, something in me settled. Here was someone who knew me before, who had been there, who understood without my having to explain. We embraced that solid, full-body hug that men usually only allow themselves in moments of extreme emotion or reunion after long separation. "You look good, Sarge," he said, stepping back to examine me. "Civilian life agrees with you." "You too," I replied, and it was true. The perpetual tension that had been his constant companion in Afghanistan had eased. There was a lightness to him that hadn't been there before. We sat on a bench overlooking a small lake, the camera crew maintaining a respectful distance, capturing our conversation without intruding. "So," Rodriguez said after we'd caught up on family news and mutual acquaintances, "this documentary, it's about your experience? What happened when you were hit?" I nodded. "About that, yes. but also about how it changed me, how it affected my understanding of what we went through over there. And I wanted to talk to you about it because, well, you were there. You saw me die. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the lake. Yeah, he said finally. I did. I was holding your hand when you flatlined in the helicopter. I heard the monitor go to that steady tone. I saw Nguyen shock you again and again. I saw the medic shake his head. And then, you came back. He turned to look at me, his eyes glistening. I wasn't sure you were going to make it, even after they got your heart started again. You were so pale, so gone. I kept thinking about what I was going to say to Jennifer, how I was going to explain that I couldn't keep you safe. The raw emotion in his voice caught me off guard. Rodriguez had always been the rock, the one who kept it together no matter what. To hear the vulnerability, the fear he'd carried, it moved me deeply. I'm sorry you had to go through that, I said quietly. He shook his head. Don't apologize, Warren. It wasn't your fault. And you came back. That's what matters. I did come back, I agreed. But I was somewhere else first. That's what I've been trying to understand, to integrate ever since. Rodriguez nodded slowly. I've read your blog, you know. The stuff you've written about what happened to you on the other side. And I've wondered, I know Thompson didn't make it. Do you think he experienced something similar? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. We'd never talked about Thompson's death in these terms before. The wound was still raw, the loss still present in our lives. I do, I said finally. I think everyone does when they cross over. What I experienced wasn't because I'm special or different. It's what awaits all of us. Thompson would have felt that peace, that love, that welcome. I believe that with my whole heart. Rodriguez was quiet again, processing. That helps, he said eventually, to think of him at peace, to think he wasn't afraid or in pain at the end. He wasn't, I said with a certainty that came from somewhere beyond rational knowledge. Whatever pain he felt was momentary. What came after was beautiful beyond words. We talked for hours, the camera capturing our conversation as it meandered through memories of Afghanistan, reflections on our lives since, and deeper explorations of what my NDE had taught me. Rodriguez listened with an open mind, occasionally asking questions that showed he'd thought deeply about these matters himself. You know what's funny, he said as our interview was winding down. When we were over there, I was the religious one, going to service whenever I could, reading my Bible at night. You were the skeptic, always questioning, never quite buying into the whole God thing. And now look at us, I laughed. Life's full of surprises. That it is, he agreed. That it is. The documentary went on to feature interviews with other members of my squad, as well as several other combat veterans who'd had NDEs. It explored how these experiences changed our relationship to trauma, to fear, to death itself. It examined the challenges of integrating such profound mystical experiences into everyday life, especially within military culture, which tends to be pragmatic, skeptical of anything that can't be empirically verified. When the film was completed, it was screened at several festivals and eventually picked up by a streaming service. The response was powerful. Veterans reached out to share their own stories, many for the first time. Families of fallen service members found comfort in the possibility that their loved ones had experienced something beautiful in their final moments. Researchers in the field of trauma and consciousness used it as a teaching tool. But the most unexpected response came through an email about 6 months after the documentary was released. It was from a man named Farid Ahmed, who identified himself as an Afghan-American physician living in California. I watched your documentary with great interest, he wrote. Your description of the village of Syedabad caught my attention, as my family is from that region. I was further intrigued when you mentioned a boy who tried to warn your squad about the ambush. The details you provided match a story my cousin told me about his son's experience during the war. My heart began to race as I read on. My cousin's son, Zamir, was 12 years old in 2011. He was living with his grandfather, the village elder, when Taliban fighters entered their village and demanded shelter and assistance. When my cousin's father refused, they killed him. Zamir witnessed this but managed to hide. The next day, when American soldiers entered the village, he tried to warn them despite the danger to himself. In the ensuing battle, he was injured but survived. He eventually made his way to Kabul with the help of distant relatives and later to the United States through a refugee program. I sat back in my chair, stunned. After all these years of wondering, of carrying the image of that boy running toward us, trying to help us despite the danger, could this really be him? Fareed's email continued. Samir is 23 now, studying engineering at UC San Diego. When I described your story to him, he confirmed that he remembers a soldier being hit by a sniper that day, a soldier who was watching him run across the open area. He has carried guilt about this for years, believing that if he had found a way to warn you sooner, this soldier might not have been hurt. I felt a wave of emotion so powerful, it nearly overwhelmed me. The boy was alive. He had survived the war, made it to America, was building a new life. And all this time, he'd been carrying guilt about what happened to me, just as I'd been carrying my own questions about what happened to him. Fareed concluded his email with an offer. If you would be interested in speaking with Samir, I believe it could be healing for both of you. He has agreed to this possibility, though he is understandably nervous about reopening these wounds from his childhood. I replied immediately, expressing my profound gratitude for the contact and my strong desire to speak with Samir. I emphasized that I harbored no negative feelings. Quite the opposite. His actions that day had been incredibly brave, and I had thought of him often over the years, hoping he had survived and found safety. 2 weeks later, I found myself on a video call with a young man whose features were both strange and hauntingly familiar. He had the same eyes, large, dark, serious, but the face had matured, lost the roundness of childhood. He sat stiffly in what looked like a dorm room, books and engineering diagrams visible on the wall behind him. Assalamu alaikum, I said, using one of the few phrases of Arabic I'd retained from my time overseas. Peace be upon you. A small smile flickered across his face. Wa alaikum assalam, he replied, and upon you peace. There was an awkward silence as we each took in the reality of the other. This connection across time and space, bridging two worlds that had collided violently that day in Sayyidabad. I want to thank you, I said finally. What you did that day, running out to warn us, knowing the danger, that was incredible bravery. Samir shook his head slightly. I was too late, he said, his English fluent but accented. I saw you fall. I thought you had died. I did die, I said simply, for a few minutes. But I came back. His eyes widened slightly. Yes, your experience. I watched the documentary. It is why I agreed to speak with you. I have questions if you don't mind. And so began a conversation that would continue on and off for years. Samir was skeptical of my near-death experience at first, viewing it through the lens of his scientific education. But he was also deeply curious, genuinely interested in understanding what I believed had happened to me. For my part, I was fascinated by his story, how he had survived that day, how he had eventually made his way to America, how he was building a new life that bridged two cultures, two worldviews. We found unexpected common ground in our shared experience of trauma, of having our lives irrevocably altered by violence, and of struggling to make meaning from that alteration. About a year after our first conversation, Samir agreed to be interviewed for a follow-up documentary that David was creating. This one focused on unexpected connections that emerged from war, enemy combatants who later became friends, civilians and soldiers whose lives intersected during conflict and reconnected in peace, families from opposite sides who found healing together. Zamir and I were featured as a unique case, the American soldier who died and returned, and the Afghan boy who tried to save him, reuniting years later to make sense of their shared trauma. The documentary showed us meeting in person for the first time since that day in Sayyidabad, at a Veterans Peace Conference in San Diego. It was a powerful moment, embracing this young man who had once been that terrified child. I felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. One of the many loose ends of war had finally been tied, not neatly, but in a way that acknowledged the complexity of our connection. Do you believe in destiny? Samir asked me as we walked along the beach after the conference. That we were meant to reconnect this way? I considered the question carefully. My near-death experience had given me a glimpse of a reality where all things are connected, where what we call coincidence might be part of a pattern too vast for our limited human perspective to comprehend. I believe our lives are both random and meaningful, I said finally. I don't think every detail is predetermined, but I do think there are currents in existence that draw certain people, certain events together. Does that make sense? He nodded slowly. In Islam, we have the concept of qadar, divine destiny. But it is not simple predestination. It is, how do you say it? A complex interplay between God's knowledge of all possibilities and our free will within those possibilities. That resonates with what I experienced, I said. There was choice. I could have stayed on the other side. But there was also purpose, a reason for my return that I didn't fully understand at the time. These conversations with Zamir deepened my understanding of my own experience. His questions, coming from a different cultural and religious perspective, made me examine my assumptions, articulate aspects of my experience I hadn't fully processed. And I like to think that my openness about what happened to me gave him permission to explore the more mystical dimensions of his own faith tradition, dimensions that his scientific education had taught him to discount. As the 10th anniversary of my near-death experience approached, I found myself reflecting on all that had happened since: the physical healing, the psychological integration, the spiritual journey, the unexpected connections and opportunities that had emerged. I thought about how far I'd come from that dying soldier in the dust of an Afghan village, and yet how present that moment still was in my life. Jennifer suggested we mark the anniversary in some meaningful way. Not a celebration exactly, she said, but an acknowledgement. A ritual to honor what happened and how it changed us. Not just you, but all of us who love you. I liked the idea. We decided to host a small gathering at our home. Just family, close friends, and a few of the veterans and researchers I'd connected with through sharing my story. We'd create a space for reflection, for sharing, for being present with the mystery of existence that my experience had illuminated. The day of the gathering, May 17th, 2021, dawned clear and warm, a perfect Minnesota spring day. Jennifer had transformed our backyard into a sanctuary, with comfortable seating arranged in a circle, flowers everywhere, small lanterns ready to be lit as evening fell. Our children, now 7 and 9, had helped prepare food and set up, understanding in their own way that this was an important day for our family. People began arriving in the late afternoon. Rodriguez came, of course, flying in from Chicago. Walsh made the trip from Fort Bragg, where he was serving out his final months before retirement. Nguyen drove up from the Mayo Clinic, where he now worked. Several members of my veterans support group came, as did Dr. Kaplan from the University of Virginia. David, the documentary filmmaker, was there with his camera, documenting this reunion as a potential epilogue to his latest project. And to my surprise and delight, Zamir flew in from California, making this the second time we'd met in person. He arrived with his uncle Fareed, who had been the bridge that connected us. Seeing him in my home, meeting my family, bridging the worlds of Afghanistan and Minnesota, it felt like a miracle, a healing I hadn't known I needed. As twilight approached, we gathered in the circle Jennifer had created. I had been uncertain about how to begin, how to frame this gathering. It wasn't exactly a religious ceremony, but it had spiritual significance. It wasn't a therapy session, but it had healing intent. It wasn't an academic discussion, but it touched on profound philosophical questions. In the end, I decided to keep it simple. I lit a central candle and welcomed everyone. 10 years ago today, I began. I died in a village on the other side of the world. For 3 minutes and 42 seconds, I experienced something that defies easy explanation, something that transformed my understanding of life, death, consciousness, and connection. I've spent the decades since trying to integrate that experience, to live in alignment with what I learned, to share the message I brought back. I looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes. Each of you has been part of that journey in some way. You've listened, questioned, supported, challenged, connected, and helped me make meaning from something that initially seemed beyond meaning. I'm deeply grateful for your presence in my life, and especially for your presence here today. I paused, feeling the weight and significance of the moment. I'd like to invite each of you to share, if you wish, something about your own journey with the big questions of existence, life, death, consciousness, connection. Not as an intellectual exercise, but from your personal experience, your lived truth. There's no right or wrong here, just your authentic exploration. What followed was one of the most profound evenings of my life. One by one, people shared their stories, their questions, their moments of clarity or confusion in the face of existence's great mysteries. Some spoke of their own brushes with death. Others described mystical experiences that had come through meditation, prayer, psychedelics, or moments of extreme stress or joy. Some shared their struggles with faith, their journeys between belief and doubt, their attempts to reconcile scientific understanding with spiritual intuition. Rodriguez spoke about a moment in the helicopter after I'd been hit, when he'd been certain I was gone. I felt something, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not like Mike described. Nothing that clear or dramatic. But just for a second there was this. I don't know. This sense that death isn't what we think it is. That it's a doorway, not an end. I've never told anyone that before. Walsh, always the most pragmatic among us, surprised me with his contribution. I've never had anything like what Mike experienced, he said. No lights, no tunnels, no divine presence. But I've seen men die. I've been with them in their final moments. And there's something that happens right at the end. A change. Like they see something we can't. Like they're already halfway somewhere else. I don't know what that means, but it means something. Nguyen spoke of his Buddhist upbringing, how it had shaped his understanding of consciousness and death, and how his medical training had both challenged and deepened those understandings. The more I learn about the brain, he said, the more miraculous consciousness seems. Science can tell us which neurons fire when we have certain experiences, but it can't tell us why there's an I experiencing them at all. That's still a mystery. Dr. Kaplan shared insights from her research, how the consistent elements in NDEs across cultures suggested something beyond cultural conditioning or expectation. These experiences have a universal quality, she said, a core truth that transcends the particulars of how they're interpreted within different belief systems. That suggests to me that they're touching something real, something fundamental to human existence. But it was Zamir's contribution that moved me most deeply. He spoke of growing up in a culture where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was more permeable than in the West, where dreams and visions were taken seriously as potential sources of truth. He described how the trauma of war had simultaneously shattered his faith and deepened it, shattered his childish understanding of God as a protector who would prevent suffering, deepened his adult understanding of God as the source of resilience and meaning within suffering. When I saw you fall, he said, looking directly at me, I thought I had failed. Failed my grandfather, who had taught me to help others, even at cost to myself. Failed you, a stranger who was in danger, partly because of me. That failure haunted me for years. He paused, his expression softening. But now I wonder if perhaps I did not fail after all. Perhaps I was meant to be there, to witness, to remember, to connect with you years later. Perhaps your journey to the other side and back was part of something larger that neither of us fully understands. As the sharing continued, as darkness fell, and the lanterns cast their gentle light over our circle, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and wonder. Here, in this gathering of people from different backgrounds, different belief systems, different experiences, there was a shared recognition of mystery, a willingness to stand at the edge of the known and peer into the unknown with both humility and courage. This, I realized, was the true message I'd brought back from the other side. Not a dogma to be believed, not a religion to be followed, not even a philosophy to be adopted, but an invitation to live with questions, to embrace mystery, to recognize that our human understanding is limited, but our human capacity for connection is vast. As the evening drew to a close, I offered a final reflection. What I experienced when I died confirmed what the great wisdom traditions have been telling us for millennia. That we are more than our bodies, that consciousness is more fundamental than matter, that love is the basic force of reality, that we are all connected in ways our everyday awareness cannot perceive. I looked around the circle, meeting each person's gaze one more time. But the most important thing I learned wasn't on the other side. It was in coming back, in living with one foot in each world. It's that we don't have to die to glimpse these truths. They're available to us here and now, in moments of deep connection, in acts of compassion, in the quiet space between thoughts, in the recognition of ourselves in others. I reached for Jennifer's hand on one side and Rodriguez's on the other. This is why I came back. Not to convince anyone of anything, but to be fully present in this messy, beautiful, painful, joy-filled human experience. To remember and remind others that beneath the surface of our separate lives, we are already one. That beyond the apparent finality of death, consciousness continues, that surrounding the seeming randomness of existence, there is meaning and purpose. The circle fell silent. In that silence, I felt a presence, a warmth, a knowing that echoed what I'd experienced on the other side. Not as overwhelming, not as complete, but recognizable, like hearing a familiar melody played softly in another room. I knew then that the message I died to bring back wasn't just for others, it was for me as well. A reminder when the veil of ordinary consciousness grew thick of what lies beyond. A compass when the path grew unclear, pointing toward ultimate reality. A connection when isolation threatened to the source of all being. As our gathering dispersed, as people hugged and promised to stay in touch, as Jennifer and I cleaned up the yard and put our tired children to bed, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending. There would be more to explore, more to understand, more to share in the years ahead. But a milestone, a moment of integration, a recognition of how far I'd come on this journey that began with a sniper's bullet in a dusty Afghan village. That night, I dreamed of Afghanistan. Not the nightmare version that had haunted my sleep for years after my return. The violence, the fear, the helplessness. Instead, I dreamed of the mountains at dawn, the way the light painted them gold and pink. I dreamed of children laughing, of tea shared in quiet companionship, of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. And in the dream, I stood on a hillside overlooking Syedabad, but it was whole, peaceful, untouched by war. Beside me stood a figure I recognized not by sight but by presence. The consciousness, the being, the love I had encountered on the other side. "Do you understand now?" the presence seemed to ask, though there were no words. In the strange logic of dreams, I both did and didn't understand. I knew that my experience, my death in return, was both uniquely mine and universally human. I knew that the message I'd brought back was both simple enough for a child to grasp and complex enough to spend lifetimes exploring. I knew that the purpose of my return was both clear in its broad outlines and mysterious in its specific unfolding. "I'm trying," I answered in the dream. "I'm trying to understand, to remember, to live what I learned." The presence emanated something like approval, like affirmation, like love. "That is enough," it seemed to say. "That is the purpose. Not perfect understanding, but wholehearted engagement. Not complete remembering, but continuous remembering, bringing the separate pieces back together into wholeness." I woke with tears on my face and Jennifer's arm around me. "You okay?" she murmured, half asleep. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm okay. I'm right where I need to be." And I was. Not because my life was perfect, it wasn't. Not because I had all the answers, I didn't. Not because I never struggled with doubt or fear or pain, I did regularly. But because I had glimpsed what lies beyond those struggles, beyond this limited existence, beyond death itself. I had experienced the love that holds all things together, the consciousness that underlies all being, the connection that transcends all separation. That glimpse, that experience, that knowing. It doesn't make the human journey easy, but it makes it meaningful. It doesn't remove suffering, but it transforms how we relate to it. It doesn't eliminate death, but it reveals it as transition rather than ending. This is the message I died to bring back. The truth I live to embody, however imperfectly. We are more than we appear to be. We are connected beyond our seeming separation. We are loved beyond our comprehension. And death, when it comes, is not the end of our journey, but a return to our source, our true home, our deepest self. Until that day comes again for me, I will continue to share this message. Not with evangelical fervor, not with dogmatic certainty, but with humble gratitude for having been granted a glimpse behind the veil. I will continue to live as a bridge between worlds, a translator of the ineffable, a witness to what awaits us all. Because that's why I came back. That's why I'm still here. That's the mission I accepted when I chose to return from the light to this world of shadows and suffering, of beauty and love, of struggle and transcendence. This messy, glorious, temporary, eternal human experience that we share. I died in Afghanistan from a sniper's bullet. I rose above my body and felt only peace. I returned with a message of connection, consciousness, and love. And every day since, I've been learning what it means to live that message, to embody that truth, to be both fully human and more than human, just as we all are, whether we remember it yet or not. This is my story. This is my testimony. This is my truth. And somewhere beyond the limits of time and space as we know them, it's your truth too.